Every civilization believed its money was unbreakable. Every ruling power declared its guarantees eternal. And without exception, history has made fools of them all. From ancient Rome to revolutionary Paris, from the American South to present-day Beirut, ordinary people have awakened to discover their life savings reduced to nothing, their wages rendered meaningless, their futures quietly consumed by systems they once considered invincible. Financial collapse isn't an anomaly. It is the pattern. The real question was never whether monetary systems break down. It's whether you'll be ready when yours does. The deadliest financial error isn't greed or recklessness. It's the assumption of permanence. We stare at our bank statements, our national currencies, and treat them as geological fact. But money is not stone. It is belief. And belief can dissolve in a single night. That's precisely why history, brutal as it is, remains so indispensable. Every collapse leaves behind a readable map. Patterns, warnings, and the wreckage of misplaced confidence. And if you study that map carefully, you'll notice something uncomfortable. The survivors were never the most trusting. They were the most skeptical. Welcome to Money Records, where money, power, and history collide. Consider the Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of Rome that somehow outlasted its western counterpart by a full millennium. Its economic backbone was the gold solidus, a coin so consistently reliable that traders from Western Europe, the Levant, and Central Asia accepted it with absolute confidence. For hundreds of years, it functioned as the medieval world's closest equivalent to a global reserve currency. But here's the part that stings. You'd expect the Byzantines to have remembered Rome's catastrophic experiment with the silver denarius, how emperors had shaved and diluted it until it was little more than bronze wearing a silver disguise. We've examined that story before. Yet centuries on, the Byzantines repeated the very same error, this time in gold. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, they began diluting the solidus, reducing its purity, stretching its weight, blending in inferior metals. Trust held for a while, then it fractured. The coin that had once anchored Mediterranean commerce became an elaborate political fiction. Debasement didn't just weaken the currency, it poisoned the entire system's credibility. What survived the wreckage? Not royal decrees, not government assurances. Merchants who had quietly accumulated physical gold or acquired land beyond the empire's reach preserved their wealth, while everyone else watched their savings dissolve. That is the first enduring lesson of monetary history. Power cannot resist the urge to corrupt its own money. And when it does, genuine value migrates toward things that cannot be counterfeited into existence. But not every monetary catastrophe originates in the halls of power. Some arrive without warning, from the natural world itself. In the mid-14th century, Europe was struck by the most lethal pandemic in recorded history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, somewhere approaching half of Europe's entire population perished. Cities fell silent. Villages ceased to exist. Trading networks that had taken generations to build disintegrated within seasons. And yet the economic story of the plague era contains a twist most people never expect. When half the workforce vanishes, the surviving half becomes extraordinarily valuable. Laborers could suddenly command wages unthinkable a generation before. Land, once fiercely competed over, became almost embarrassingly abundant relative to the people left to work it. Families possessing liquidity, silver, goods, working capital of any kind, found themselves holding leverage they had never previously imagined. Estates that formerly commanded fortunes could be acquired for fractions of their former price. Properties stood vacant, fields unworked, entire manor houses abandoned. The survivors inherited a buyer's market of historical proportions. If that sounds unsettlingly contemporary, that's because it should. The COVID pandemic delivered a compressed modern version of this same dynamic. Supply chains seized, governments injected trillions into collapsing economies, and wealth separated further between those who held assets and those living on the edge of each paycheck. American housing markets surged. Stock markets rebounded with startling speed, while millions of ordinary workers struggled to keep roofs over their heads. The echo is unmistakable. Pandemics have always reshuffled wealth. Black Death survivors leveraged sudden scarcity to ascend social structures that had previously been sealed to them. COVID-era survivors with liquidity absorbed property, equities, and businesses that others could no longer hold on to. The lesson is neither warm nor popular, but it is accurate. Crises systematically reward those who carry reserves and systematically punish those who don't. While pandemics illustrate how rapidly external shocks can overturn an economy, the banking collapse of Renaissance Florence reveals something equally sobering, that institutions projecting absolute security can disintegrate like a line of dominoes. In the 1340s, Florence was the unquestioned financial capital of Europe. Its great banking dynasties, the Bardi and Peruzzi families, had extended enormous loans to monarchs across the continent, most ruinously to England's Edward III, who borrowed heavily to fund his French campaigns and then simply stopped paying. When Edward defaulted, the banks buckled and broke. Depositors lost everything. Commerce ceased. Florence, previously a symbol of mercantile brilliance, descended into prolonged crisis. The ordinary citizen who had placed trust in these famous, powerful, supposedly unshakable institutions discovered that prestige offered zero protection when the structure failed. The lesson crystallized for generations afterward. Too big to fail has always been a comfortable lie. Institutions exist to generate returns for themselves, not to guarantee yours. When they collapse, your savings become collateral damage. This lesson does not age. From the Florentine banking dynasties to Lehman Brothers in 2008, to Lebanon's banks freezing every account in 2019, the sequence is identical. Security exists until the precise moment it doesn't. The American Civil War lives in collective memory as a conflict of battles, ideology, and the eventual abolition of slavery. But running beneath every military campaign was a financial war that most Americans today have almost entirely forgotten. Both the Union and the Confederacy confronted the same brutal arithmetic. Warfare at that scale consumed resources faster than taxation could supply them, and so both sides printed money. The North issued greenbacks, paper currency backed not by gold, but by the reputation of the United States government. The experiment held barely, but not without consequence. As more greenbacks entered circulation, each one bought less. Inflation gnawed at their purchasing power steadily. In the South, the collapse was absolute. The Confederacy printed its graybacks with a recklessness born of desperation. By the war's closing months, Confederate inflation had climbed to levels that seemed almost surreal. Prices multiplied by thousands of %. A soldier's monthly salary might not purchase a single meal by the time he received it. Families arrived at markets carrying armloads of currency to buy basic necessities. And by 1865, Confederate paper wasn't merely weak, it was ceremonially worthless. What held value through that destruction was never paper. It was land, food, gold, and physical goods. Anything that existed independently of government promises. For ordinary Southern families, this meant the obliteration of lifelong savings. For those with access to tangible assets, it meant acquiring property at prices that would never exist again. This is a chapter most Americans have been permitted to forget. Your own nation has already survived a complete currency collapse. When it came, protection arrived from assets the government was powerless to inflate away. France provides an equally devastating illustration of how revolutions can destroy monetary systems faster than any foreign army. In the 1790s, the revolutionary government, having seized the Catholic Church's vast property holdings, created a new paper currency, the assignat, supposedly backed by the value of those confiscated lands. On paper, the logic seemed defensible. In practice, it became catastrophic. The government printed assignats compulsively, each new wave diluting every note that preceded it. Prices climbed violently. Wages could not keep pace. The assignat didn't just weaken, it evaporated. Farmers refused to exchange food for paper that felt lighter each week, demanding silver or direct barter instead. Bread riots returned to Paris. The revolution, which had promised liberation, was consuming its own citizens through the inflation it created. Those who emerged intact weren't the ones clutching patriotic paper. They were the ones who had secured food stores, silver coins, or land, things no printing press could manufacture. For the average Parisian, the lesson arrived too late to matter. Promises, however revolutionary and noble their framing, are only worth what someone else will accept for them. When acceptance evaporates, so do your savings. Across 2 centuries and half the globe, the lesson resurfaces with cruel precision. In 1997, a speculative assault on the Thai baht ignited what became a continent-wide financial catastrophe. Thailand had accumulated substantial dollar-denominated debt, sustained by confidence in its currency peg. When that peg broke, those foreign currency obligations became instantly unpayable. Capital flooded out. Currencies across Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea collapsed in rapid succession. Entire economies contracted. Unemployment spiked. Government after government went to the IMF with hat in hand. The ones who suffered most profoundly were not the hedge funds and institutional traders who engineered the original pressure. They were ordinary families whose savings lost half their real value overnight, whose mortgage payments doubled in local currency terms, whose employers shuddered, and yet the recognizable pattern was there. Those holding dollar assets or diversified wealth abroad survived far better than those who had trusted local currency and local institutions. Nations carrying foreign-denominated debt were forced into structural austerity, while international capital firms acquired their best assets at devastated prices. What appeared to be a regional financial crisis was, beneath the surface, a massive intercontinental transfer of wealth from the many to the few who had positioned themselves correctly beforehand. By this point, the architecture should be visible. Whether you examine Revolutionary France, Civil War America, Renaissance Italy, or modern Southeast Asia, the same structures repeat. Paper currencies fail. Debt enslaves nations and individuals alike. And the survivors are almost never the ones who trusted the system most completely. They are the ones who recognized its fundamental fragility before the recognition became universal, and therefore too late. The most disturbing dimension of this history is that it isn't safely confined to the past. Between 2019 and 2021, Lebanon's banking system did something that still registers as almost incomprehensible to citizens of stable economies. It simply locked its doors. Lebanese depositors woke to find their accounts frozen, their withdrawals capped, and their currency in freefall. The Lebanese pound shed over 90% of its value. A working lifetime of accumulated savings became nearly worthless in months. Citizens queued outside bank branches, pleading for access to funds they had deposited in good faith, and were turned away empty-handed. This wasn't a crisis that struck the careless or the reckless. It consumed middle-class professionals, retired civil servants, physicians, and engineers, anyone who had operated within the system as it instructed them to operate. The lesson it delivered is perhaps the most important in this entire history. Your deposit is not a vault holding your money. It is a loan you've extended to an institution that, when sufficiently stressed, reserves the right to not repay you. Those who came through it with something intact were those who had moved assets abroad, converted savings into gold or hard property, or kept liquid reserves entirely outside the banking apparatus. Everyone who trusted the conventional architecture lost. If this geography feels comfortably distant, reconsider. In 2008, American families watched their homes disappear through foreclosure, and their retirement accounts evaporate, while the institutions that engineered the collapse were rescued with public funds. In 2020, governments across the developed world created trillions in new currency to prevent economic seizure, a necessary intervention that simultaneously enriched asset holders while leaving wage earners watching their purchasing power erode in slow motion. In 2023, several American regional banks collapsed within days once depositor confidence faltered, reminding everyone that the protective promise of institutional stability is a story societies tell themselves until the precise moment the doors close permanently. So what actually protects you when the structure gives way? History refuses to offer a single clean answer because the answer has never been singular. In Byzantium, it was physical gold. After the Black Death, it was liquid capital available to purchase land that abundant death had made cheap. In Florence, it was refusing to place blind faith in institutions projecting invincibility. In the Civil War South, it was tangible goods. In Revolutionary France, it was food and property. In 1990s Asia, it was avoiding debts denominated in currencies you couldn't control. In Lebanon, it was moving your savings before the gates closed. The specific asset changes with the specific crisis, but the underlying principle never shifts. Survival flows toward those who recognize what carries genuine value when comfortable illusions finally surrender. And here lies the paradox that should disturb your comfortable assumptions. Collapse is simultaneously catastrophe and opportunity. For those who never questioned the permanence of the system, it is ruin without recourse. But for those who maintained real assets, preserved liquidity, and held things that no government printing press could replicate, collapse becomes the moment to acquire at prices that stability never permits. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners, because there was simply more land than people left to claim it. After 2008, those who held cash accumulated properties while millions faced foreclosure. Every collapse in history has functioned as a transfer, from those who were unprepared to those who were positioned. But the deepest form of protection was never purely material. The survivors of history's great monetary crises weren't exclusively those who owned gold or land. They were those who could produce something others needed when chaos made mere possession unreliable. The baker who could still turn grain into bread. The craftsperson who could repair what the wealthy could no longer easily replace. The farmer who fed communities when supply chains evaporated. The merchant who knew how to move goods across borders when official systems froze. These people didn't simply endure collapses, they rose through them. In every serious crisis, currency loses its meaning while productive capacity retains every bit of its value. People still require food, tools, shelter, connection, and trade. Those capable of providing these things reliably never remain poor for long. That is the most complete form of protection history has ever demonstrated. Not institutional faith, not passive hope that governments will intervene on your behalf in time, but the layered combination of genuine assets, productive skills, and the clear-eyed recognition that every financial illusion eventually meets the reality it was constructed to conceal. Every collapse is ultimately a transfer. From the trusting majority to the prepared few. From paper promises to tangible value. From passive savers who assumed permanence to active builders who planned for its absence. History has delivered this verdict in every century, and across every civilization it has touched. The question it leaves you with is brutally simple. When the transfer comes, and it always comes, will you be among those holding promises, or among those holding something real? History doesn't repeat itself, but if you refuse to study it, it will bury you in the same grave it dug for everyone who came before you and believed they were somehow different. If this reshaped how you see money and time, subscribe to Money Records. The answers have always been in the past, and on Money Records, I'll keep showing you where to find them.